Hello and welcome back to EGX Digital. I am really pleased to be running this panel. My name is Johnny Chiodini and today we're going to be talking about the history of Arkane Studios. This is the first time we've really been able to interview the Austin office and the Lyon office at the same time, so I'm very pleased to be joined by Ricardo, co-creative director, and Dinga, who's the game director at Arkane Lyon. Hello, greetings to both of you.
Hey there.
Hi, Johnny.
So
Thanks
again,
for hosting us.
yeah, well, thank you so much for agreeing to sort of be on this panel. Arkane is 20. That must feel weird.
It is weird to be at a studio that has been around that long, and this is the longest that I've been at any studio. On top of that, and I haven't even been there all 20 of the years I've been there. I think almost 11 now. But yeah, it's weird to think about that.
It's definitely we can feel the to me it's odd because it's almost the same as Ricardo. I arrived. It will soon be 10 years actually, very soon. So it's a nice synchronization
Yeah.
to 10. But it's the same. Not only does it feel like quite intimidating to be in a studio that has been around for so long, but also those 10 years have passed like this. So it's a
And I mean, obviously the studio must have changed quite a bit over the years that you've been there. What are some of your earliest memories of working at Arkane? Is it strange to look back on how things operated then versus now?
I'm sure Dinga's experience is pretty similar, but when I first started at Arkane, it was very small. I guess smaller on the US side than the Lyon side, even because when I joined in, I think it was 2009, there was just like 7 people in an office. It was like Raph, Harvey, Anthony Huso, I think Quinn was there. Stephen Hurd, our lead programmer, just started. It was a very tiny handful of people, and then there were a video conference, little carts set up with video conferencing monitors on them in like 3 or 4 spots in the office, so people could, and they were always on. So it was like a portal to the folks in Lyon, and it was just in a very, very small office space, all, like 7 or 8 people in there. And it was like that for a good year or so before we started ramping up on Dishonored. So where, fast forward to now, we've got 2 studios, one in Austin, one in Lyon. Both of them have full, teams, tons of people, tons of great people. So it definitely feels a lot different now. But it also, at the same time, it still feels like the same spirit. We're still making the same kind of games. We're still talking about the same kinds of things. We just have a little bit more of a, we went from like a small gang to like now we have an army.
yeah, and it's also funny because I think one of the things that slightly changed is the spirit of the people who joined, because at the time where we joined, not a lot of people knew Arkane. It was like
Yeah.
the people who loved Arkane, loved this kind of games, followed Harvey or Raph's, career, etc., etc. So, but now we get people who come who have played more Dishonored than we do, who has like
Yeah.
are super fans. They know what Billy Lurk likes to eat at tea time, etc., and we don't. So it's
Yeah.
that's the thing that is that has changed a little bit, but the passion itself, yes, I agree. I totally agree. Is very much the same kind of energy. But this time, each time someone new comes, we have this feeling of, oh, they know what we're about. It's not like we have to explain and rediscuss all those things as much.
Yeah. It's funny when somebody like brings something up that you invented, but that you can't even remember. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah, I can't imagine how strange it must be to come into a climate where people are coming in as former consumers of the products.
Yeah.
When you've been there since the days before, that was really a phenomenon in the hiring process. But to go back slightly, you talked about kind of there still being the same spirit and the same kind of ethos today that you had back when, you know, it was two offices with a portal on a cart to connect them. Could you just talk a bit more about that ethos and that spirit and what you understand about it and what makes it distinctly arcane, I suppose?
Well, I think over the years, there's a bunch of little bitty channels we could go down, distinctives, but over the years, I've managed to kind of boil it down to two things for me personally anyways. One is we've always focused on making games that let players be part of the creative process, right? Players in any game that we make, players always get to improvise solutions. They get to approach the problems we present them with creatively. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that we've always focused on since the beginning is in-depth world building, like creating a space for the player that just has a lot of depth, a lot of reality, so that they can really believe that in the world that they're set in. Of course, there are a bunch of little specific things inside those two pillars, but those are the two things that I think we've always held on to, and that we'll continue to do so going forward. What do you think, Dinga?
Yes, I definitely agree. I would say that there is also maybe as a not as much as a pillar, but a filter to approach those two pillars, which is the spirit of experimentation. We experiment, we try things, we go back, we kill our babies several times around. Sometimes necromance them weirdly, but but there is this whole spirit of experimenting a lot, even on things you think you know, questioning yourselves, re-examining the same question we asked on the last project, just to be really sure that it is still relevant for a number of reasons, like this project is different, the technology has evolved, do we still have the same limitation, like all those things. We really try to not set ourselves in a comfort zone, even when we are making, like for instance, when Austin made the Knife of Dunwall DLC, it was supposed to be just a DLC and expansion, but the amount of rethinking even core things like having a voice protagonist.
That's a good point.
We always try to make experiments, take risk, and surprise and delight.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. We always say that our legacy or our heritage is immersive sims. So that's like in our bloodstream, that's in our DNA. But Dinga's right that with each successive title, that's where we came from. So it's always evident in the game. But we also try to rethink things and add something new to the mix. Another good example of that would be Moon Crash, and even Deathloop now. Just adding in mechanics that you might consider to be the staples of other genres, like roguelikes or adventure games or whatever.
I mean, I would love to kind of rattle through some of those titles and talk about kind of the process and the babies you killed then sort of resurrected as we go. But if we could just for a moment wind the clock all the way back. I appreciate you might not have worked on it, but obviously Arx Fatalis was the studio's first title in 2002. It must be interesting to look back on that now. Do you see sort of seeds of the company culture that sort of then blossomed in later titles in that game?
Well, I mean, just looking at exactly what Rick expressed here, like a reverence for the immersive sims, because that's where we come, and we can clearly see, the Ultima Underworld influence and roots for this game, like the homage, spiritual successor, even status there, but also innovation and experimentation with some things like the spell casting that was, not a frequent mechanic in games, to say the least. So even with and then it's not even talking about the fiction of it, because the fiction is very very different from Ultima. So there is definitely some. If you went to the ending, it's a bit more cosmic than you might think. I think it exactly exemplifies that. Putting the player in front of the experience, like giving them a lot of freedom, ownership on their experience, etc. Build on a strong foundation of the genre we love, but also experimentations, innovations along the way, and also trying to have fun doing it. I think you can feel in Arcs a lot of a lot of love from the team at the time. It's very evident.
Yeah, I would say, just to add like a concrete example, would just be one of the things that is cool about Arcs, and is definitely influenced from even previous games like Ultima Underworld, like Dinga mentioned, is just the completeness of the space itself. Right, the coherence of the world, like it's all internally consistent. It's a big dungeon. It's a big interconnected dungeon that the player can retraverse and revisit and sort of explore at their own pace. And so you can see that that specific quality like translated to games like Prey, and even in the level design of particular levels within Dishonored.
Mm-hmm.
So Ricardo, just indulge me for a minute. So could we say that Prey is more, some people said, is it Dishonored in space? Some people say it's a system shock, but could we say that it's Arcs in space in a way?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we internally on the team, you're totally right. We used to call it like it's a big space dungeon that we were building. So yeah, 100%.
Cool. Now, obviously, I think it's safe to say that it was Dishonored that really put Arkane on the map in terms of gamers' consciousness and kind of the amount of attention that was being paid to the studio. So I guess this is probably a good time to ask what you think are the key things that make an Arkane game an Arkane game. What is it about Dishonored specifically that kind of really embodies the ethos of the two respective offices?
I think it's a vast question. It's a vast question because, for all intents and purposes, it is, I'm saying that sometimes almost, a bit humbled with what we accomplished at the time, with the team size we had and the challenges we had, but I think it's a very, very vast game, like with a lot of things to it, not only gameplay, but also world building, art direction. It is it's almost like in technology, it's almost like if every single of those components of the game was pushed to the maximum we could possibly do at the time. So that's why sometimes when I'm trying to answer a question like that, it's a bit hard to know where to start.
Sure.
But I think I think it's probably this. I think to me what makes Dishonored special for me is how how can I say that? How thorough the exploration was in all of these elements and how it translates into the game, in the gameplay, in the world building, in the art direction, in the technology, the sound department also. It's really a whole that is very harmonious. Like there is a lot of harmony with all those components, but at the same time, just listing the elements on paper, I'm not sure you would exactly get what it's cuisine basically. It's not, you see what I mean? It's cuisine. Yeah. You have all those ingredients.
It's a stew. Exactly. A chili.
It's candy eels.
Cassoulet.
Yeah, it basically congregates in something that is very unique. I think better than the sum of its parts is something every game developer is striving for. But I think that's a good element. So to me, what makes it truly Arkane is it is true to the lineage again of the company. It is also doing a lot of new things and daring things, especially at the time. And at the same time, it has a very strong identity. I think if you talk about the art direction, for instance, as a big component of Arkane games, I think this is the game where, because if you look at Arcs and Dark Messiah of Might and Magic, you can already see the game design pillars, you can already see the technology, you can already see a lot of elements, but the art direction really took its wings at Arkane with this project. It's really ours. You cannot see a screenshot of Dishonored, not know that it's Dishonored.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
It's a number of things.
Yeah, if I were to cite just one of the ingredients of the stew that Dinga is talking about, just as by way of example, and this is hearkening back to the sort of like two pillars that I was talking about before, like giving the player a bunch of the ability to be expressive in the game. On the design side, one of the things that we do is we don't reward, we have this sort of principles that we don't reward the player for how they did something, just that they did something, right? So like we don't give out loot or experience points or story bits or whatever because, you know, just to use a silly example, like we tell you like there's a guy in a room that you need to assassinate, but we don't care how you get into the room. We don't reward you for picking the lock versus going in through the roof versus climbing through the window versus going in through the sewer tunnels beneath. Any of those things are valid, or or blowing up the wall, or whatever the case may be in a particular game. Instead, we just tell you what the goal is, and then we give you a bunch of really cool tools to play with that are relevant to that goal, and then we just turn you loose into the world and say go for it. And we reward you for accomplishing the goal, but not for how you did it. How you did it is totally up to you. And hopefully we've done a good job of teaching you how to use all our fun gameplay tools and stuff like that. But that would be a distinctive, I think, in our approach to game design. And I think that's super evident in Dishonored, right? We give the player like, here's blink, here's possession, here's stealth, here's a whole bucket full of really fun tools to play with, and then we just say, and here's your goal, you need to get to this location, you need to assassinate this target, you need to capture this thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've really hit the nail on the head in kind of identifying that an Arkane game is a number of components, but those components have really been pushed to the greatest extent possible. But what does an idea have to have in order for you to say, yes, let's make that? How do you differentiate between something you intuitively know is and isn't Arkane, as it were?
Briefly, I would say, I would just mention two things right off the bat. One is, of course, it has to be something that feels like it's appropriate for whatever the setting is that we're working in. It has to be dramatic, and it has to feel like this fits inside of the Prey universe, or this fits inside of the Dishonored universe. Although there is a lot of leeway for shaping almost any kind of idea to make it fit, right? But the second thing, and it's probably more important, and this is the thing where the stew comes into play, and it takes a while for it to cook, is that it has to have a lot of meaningful connections to a bunch of the other game mechanics in the game, right? So take something like the mimic ability in Prey. That has a lot of meaningful connections to a bunch of other things in the world. It's meaningfully connected to the fiction, of course, but it's the ability. It gives the player the ability to transform into physics objects. Well, in order for that to be cool, there has to be a shitload of physics objects all over the game, right? It's also an ability that the creatures have, so they can do the same thing you can do. Actually, they can do it first because you learn it from them. It's connected to, you can combo it with all kinds of other powers that you already or could potentially possess as well, right? You could turn into a physics object and launch yourself through the air with the blast ability. So all of our game mechanics sort of go through this filter, this iteration process where we come up with a power or a tool or a weapon or whatever the case may be, and then we begin. Of course, we already have in mind a lot of ideas anyways, but at the iteration process we begin to discover all the meaningful connections it can have to other systems in the game so that it has lots of depth, right? That's what I would say anyways.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the core thing, and it's the same for a concept art or a piece of concept art, for a prop or a narrative idea, a background narrative idea for a character or something like that. Overall, I think the live or die is, does it fit with what we are doing? Does it fit with the ecosystem of the game? If it's a narrative idea, does it make my gameplay more meaningful? Does it actually might influence my take on the events that might make me change my playstyle just because I learned this optional bit of lore about this character? Now I don't want them dead, and I want to find a way to get rid of them without killing them, etc., etc. So I think it's the important part. The easier ideas to cut are the ones that have the less that are less interlinked with the rest. I mean, it's here, it's nice, it's nice little thing, but would we miss it? Not necessarily. Does it make the rest more interesting? Not necessarily. So those ones are easy to cut if we have to make a choice. Some of them still live in the game, but overall, I think it's the fitting in this ecosystem is on a number of different ways, on a number of different levels. And then I think there is a few there is a few things that are just I guess sometimes company culture, based on what we did and a number of things. And sometimes when you propose something that is, like, for instance, Ricardo will probably laugh, but if I was to propose an animation where if you land, when dropping from high, you would land with your fist first toward the ground, I guess you would have
3-point hero stance.
Yeah, you would need to make a very, very good case about it. Not because, but because it was discussed at some point and we more or less took a very arbitrary stance at the time. It doesn't mean we won't rediscuss it if it's relevant, but sometimes we have some of those, like, ladders and
ladders. That's a really good example, actually. Ladders. It's like some of it's just like it's just company culture. It's what we.
But it's funny. So there is a little bit of you sometimes you throw an idea like that, that it will be almost heresy, but sometimes it does pick up, and it means that we're ready to move on that role. So it's interesting.
Sure. I mean, well, now would probably be a good moment to kind of talk about those babies and the Dishonored we didn't see, I guess. I mean, what did the first version of that idea look like when you first started working on Dishonored? Was it comparatively similar to the finished game, or was there a time when it was going in a completely different direction?
That's a good question. And you're making me try to think back to like 7, 8, 9 years ago now. There's lots of cobwebs in there, man. I mean, there was definitely a lot of iteration around the player abilities. Just to give one example, because I mean, lots of things changed, like the fiction, the setting and stuff, of course, went through iterations as well. But I think one of the signature abilities of Dishonored, one of the things that's when you think of Dishonored, you think of the blink ability. Mm-hmm. It's part of the backbone of the game experience. It's the power that we give you for free at the beginning of the game, and then everything else after that is up to you. But everyone has blink, basically, and so that went through probably like a dozen different incarnations before we landed on the sort of like targeted instant teleport. And even once we knew the kind of power it was going to be, even just like the amount of work it took into making it reliable and smooth for the player, so that like little tweaky things, like if you targeted the edge of a ledge, that it would auto mantle the player up onto the ledge, mm-hmm. like things like that, just to make the experience smooth for the player. But we had early versions where it was like, you target, it was way more constrained. Like you target an AI and it puts you behind him, so that it sets you up for a backstab, right? But that didn't pass that filter that I was talking about earlier, because the scope of what you can use that ability for suddenly is way more narrow, right? It's way more like custom and bespoke, instead of like open-ended and letting the players like be it doesn't allow as much expression on the part of the player to target an AI and put you behind them. I think there was another version that was like, instead of like a teleport through the air, it was like you rush forward, like a lightning bolt really fast, down the street or across the rooftop or whatever. But ultimately, of course, it settled in this like long range, targeted teleport that's way more atomic and lets players be more creative.
Yeah, it's funny when it's funny about Blink. One thing, a small detail, is the fact that that's one of the of the gameplay systems that did that did get care from both studios. It was started in Austin and then it was finalized in Lyon. So you have every love of everyone poured on on that one. You could really tell. It's funny. There is a few systems like that have been like moving around owners for various reasons, and you can really tell because they've been, how can I say that? Everyone tried to poke holes in them. That's why they are so robust in the end. It's funny, but I think it's about the Dishonored we didn't see. You briefly alluded to that, but I think acknowledging the range of how different the setting could have been is interesting for the record, because it did, it ends up with this, but it was I won't give any specifics, but I think we already said things like at some point it was themed around ninjas. Point it was themed in the real world. At some point it was in the real world, more or less. It
was like London during the time of the plague or something like that. Like the actual Black Plague.
Wow.
Yeah. So there was like a number of changes, and it's funny because I remember when I joined, which was at the end of the pre-production. So you would imagine a lot of things have been settled already, but actually the role of the outsider was being completely changed.
Oh yeah.
He was originally like more like a Mephisto kind of figure who
like a Faustian bargain kind of thing, like do this wicked thing and I'll give you a power in exchange.
Exactly. Yep. So it's and again I think it's a testament to how much the team really strived to make the formula work, etc. That we went through all those things, but at no point did we feel, at no point did it feel like going in every direction. It was always following a thread that made sense and evolved, and sometimes we changed our minds because in French we have a saying that only the fools never change their minds. So at some point we did change our minds along the way, but it did evolve a lot, and both as an artifact, like the whole thing, when you think about it, and at every level.
Hearing you say that, Dinga, brings to mind how challenging it is to develop a new IP. New IP is like the hardest thing to do in the world, I think.
Yeah, definitely. We are in the middle of, we not that we announced ours a while back, but it's definitely trying, because at the same time it's interesting for me because I was Dishonored 2 is the first sequel that Arkane did. As a project, so having consequent in sequence worked on Dishonored, then Dishonored 2, a sequel where again you're going to challenge yourselves, as I mentioned. You're going to revisit a lot of choices, you're going to try to innovate, you're going to do all those things, but at the same time that ecosystem I just mentioned, that will be Darwinizing ideas, so that the only the ones that are fit for this ecosystem will survive. That ecosystem existed, so you changed it, you moved it somewhere else, but at least it when you're working something new, like you have to establish that ecosystem and at the same time see if things are fit for it. So
exactly.
it's really fascinating though to hear you talk about, you know, kind of things like Blink, for example, kind of pinging back and forth between the two teams, and the both of you being able to recognize, as people who worked in one office or the other, sort of which bits came from which. Because I think from a consumer perspective, like you said, you know, a Dishonored screenshot when you see it. I feel like Arkane games, they have a very strong sense of, you know, purpose and design. Everything is just so. How, with, you know, with that in mind, how on earth do you get two studios in different time zones separated by an enormous body of water to go about pulling in the same direction?
Well, it's not easy.
Yeah.
I think a number of things help. One is that Raph and Harvey, who were co-creative directors on the project, they traveled a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They spent a lot of time on both sides of the ocean. They were situated in Austin, but they went to Lyon quite a bit, and other members of the team did the same thing. They would come, you know, members of the French team would come to Austin and stay with us for weeks at a time. Some of us from the Austin side, we went and stayed in France quite a bit. I went there for like 9 months, and just embedded with the design team there. And of course, we had those portals that I talked about open between us constantly. Mm-hmm. But, you know, because of the time separation, it meant that we had a very small window of time where we were overlapping within the same office space, just a handful of hours. And it probably also helped that, like, the Austin team was smaller. So it wasn't like two separate armies trying to, you know, pull in different directions. The bulk of the team was in Lyon. In Austin, we had a handful of programmers, half of the level design team, I think maybe a handful of artists, but like the bulk of the art team, half of the design team, you know, the bulk of the engineering team was in Lyon. So I think that probably helped too. I don't know, what else would you add, Dinga?
Well, I think that we did have some, as you say, I think it's important that we had some things that were where the ownership was shared, where, you know, people from both teams were working on the same feature or on the same level. So it made things much easier because again, the goal is common. For instance, we made the scrums over the VidConf. So we had this little meeting every morning where you would have, for instance, the programmers and the designer in Austin, but the animator and the sound designer would be in Lyon, and everyone would update. Okay, I did this, I'm doing that, etc., etc. Oh, I think I've seen a bug about this. Oh, yeah, okay, be careful, blah blah, and then everyone goes back to what they are doing. So actually, in a way, we tried to, I think it's those areas of the game where there was, you know, a common effort from both teams and people from both teams that radiated on the rest, so that everyone felt it's one team. So of course every now and then, for instance, you know, it would be easier to solve a problem on one side than the other because the people who who implemented it first, for instance, are there at that time, etc. So there was a number of things, but yeah, I think it's the small things, and then I think you mentioned them, but kudos also to Raph and Harvey for the direction. There was like a strong creative direction and vision for that project. It helps the rest of the team to to go in the same direction.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that we're citing all the things that made it work, but that's in spite of the fact that, you know, it was difficult. It's not like it was easy to pull that off. It was very challenging, but we were able to do it because of the things that Dinga and I are talking about. One fun bit that I always recall is that it felt a little bit of like the fable of the shoemaker and the elves, where like you would go to sleep, and when you got to work, you would know that like the other side of the team had been working for like, you know, 8 hours or so before you got into the office. So it was always cool to come into the office and go, what's new in the engine today? You know, like what got checked in, because people were working while I was, you know, sleeping or coming to work or whatever. So it was always fun to discover new stuff. It was kind of a little bit of a magical feeling. I'm not sure if it was the same way on the Lyon side, but there was always, because of the offset, like it was almost like somebody was continuously working on the game.
But you know, obviously, even though you're pulling together in terms of, you know, your scrums and people working effectively around the clock on the game, you know, just down to the fact that these offices are on, you know, different continents, there must have been kind of some different culture there. What were the visits to the other side like for each of you? What struck you most about the other office?
First, I should disclose one thing. I think I'm the person who has one of the people who has been the longest at Arcane, but never been to the other side. Yeah, I'm the exception. There was, yeah, I know. And each time I say
Can
that,
that be
someone's
true?
like, really?
Wow, that's so weird that you say that, because I think because I always see you during the winter holiday like meetings at Bethesda, I just assumed that you've been to the Austin office. That's
No.
so crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, I know.
That's bullshit. You gotta fix that.
But the funny part about that is that for me, the Austin office is like this weird dream space that exists only in a
box.
And apparently there
Oh my God.
people there walking, but no, I mean, but more seriously, I think to me, like, even if if I wasn't there physically, I was one of the people who interacted the most with people on the other side of the pond, as I was like, you know, half of the system design team. Seth was in Austin and I was in Lyon. Yeah, there was 2 systems designers on this game. I know it sounds crazy, but
that's mind blowing.
Yeah, I know. But so because of that, you know, I was working with programmers in Austin. You know, the UI for the features that were done in Austin, I was working with the UI artist here. So there was, and of course, Raph and Harvey leading the design team. I had like interaction with them every day. So it's funny. I think you see some of those cultural things, but it's more on the, you know, sometimes on the way we communicate, obviously, you know, the way we approach. But to be fair, I'm not sure it's a Lyon Austin thing. It's really a cultural thing, because when you see Raph and Harvey, for instance, even if they were both in Austin, you were going to a review with both of them, you would have a completely different way to talk about your feature that is not working, depending on which one would be there. Like the French guy would, of course, be extremely blunt and make a joke about it, whereas the American person would be very polite but very precise and in what they want, etc. So, you know, you could see that on those levels of communication, of course. But then there was things like, you know, artistic references or you know, movies that everyone has seen on one side but not the other side. It's like, what? You know, that very niche thing is you know, in the US, that American movie that no one knows in France is like what you watch every Christmas, really. So there was some funny moments like that.
Hey Dinga, in the new office, with the size of the studio over there now, do you guys still do the thing where, like, when you get to work, you shake everybody's hand?
It's not, but, well, first of all, COVID-19 happened.
Oh yeah, okay.
So so I think that's the end of it. It
okay.
will never happen again.
So a little like amusing quirk for me, when I went to live in France, in Lyon, the French studio, they did this thing where, like, whenever you got to work in the morning, you basically would go around and say hello to every other person that was already there, and it was just like a little handshake or whatever, right? And everybody, as far as I know, did this. And so when I first got there, I was like, oh, like, I guess I need to do this too. Which was, it was simultaneously like very cool, like, oh, that's a cool way to, like, you know, just kind of team bonding thing or whatever. On the other hand, as an introvert person, I wanted to get to the office as fast as possible so that I could be one of the first people there, so that I had to do that to the least amount of people. Yeah.
I
No, sorry. No, it's funny because just before Arkane, I was in the Netherlands, which is one of those places when you don't shake everyone's hand or kiss everyone. So definitely, actually, coming back to Arkane was I had to adapt to that. Because,
the same way.
I'm in your clan for that, man.
Yeah, I think I would be doing the exact same thing. I'm terrible at greeting people, so I feel you on that one, Ricardo. Now, obviously, talking about immersive sims more broadly, with Dishonored 2 and with Prey, I think certainly with Dishonored 2, it really felt like the world was being opened up, and with levels like the Clockwork Mansion, for example, it became so much more aware of how much there was to explore in the world, but also how much stuff might be hidden. Meaning, of course, there's a lot of content in these games that people just might straight up miss. Does it feel strange to be working on games in the knowledge that in a standard playthrough a player might miss like whole swathes?
Well, I think I think it depends because I think we approach it with this angle. Isn't it magic when your friend who played the same game tells you about something you had no possible idea that it exists? I think I think the interestingly, even though they are single player games historically, I think there is always this water cooler moment of what you did that is strong, that is part of the experience for us in liking those games when we were younger and when we discovered them. This is the game where you tell your friends about what happens if you combine this with that. Even at the time where, for instance, for me, I was not at all as connected to the internet when I played, there was no internet when I played Underworld, I think. But even when I played, Deus Ex, etc., I was barely reading game facts and things like that. So it was me telling my friends about this crazy game where you can do all those things. There is something a bit magic, a mystique to that, to the fact that you might miss something, but then you might either get told about it by a friend, or you might want to say, I'm going to play again and experience that other side of the world or of the story. So, I think it's not wasted because the simple fact that it exists, that that if you're making a choice, you will deliberately, miss something in a sense. It makes that choice more meaningful, and it's. I think it's part of the exploration of choice, really. As you said, Ricardo, we give a lot of agency to the players in those games, but if the choices were not meaningful and there was not a payoff to making those choices, it would be just expressive. There would not be. So I like to think of it as the contrary. It's a generous offer to the people who make the other choice, rather than something I miss if I made this choice. If you see what I mean.
Yeah, you have to know what makes it feel magical is knowing that things could have been otherwise, right? That's what makes the thing that you do meaningful. And I will say, all that being said, we still, of course, because we, have to ship a game and we have to make money so that we can keep making more games, we of course do consider how much effort we're putting into all those alternate choices. You know what I mean? If it's like, hey, this many people are going to see the thing that you're doing, but you're spending, this much money, this much time, this much effort to do it. We try to avoid that, of course. We want the, the stuff that we put the most work into that have the most impact. We want to make sure that players at least know about it, right? We don't want to hide that away. But yeah, you have to feel like I'm in, or at least my favorite kind of game, and what we shoot for with our experiences is like, even though I know it's not literally true, the game makes me believe that anything is possible.
Right.
Yeah. If you get, I think I think if you get that illusion as much as possible, we have this motto of saying yes to the player, but the thing is that it's followed with tiny lines that
little asterisk.
little asterisk that says if it's fun, if it doesn't break the game, and if it works within the scope of the game.
Mm.
And the goal.
It doesn't break the budget.
Exactly. And I think the important part with that is that what about when we can't? Well, ideally, the elegant thing is not saying no. The elegant thing is removing this question.
Unasking, yeah, exactly.
Making sure that the player doesn't have this pool to go in with this access if it's not an access. Try to make it that it's less attractive if you cannot just make it available.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We also try really hard to uninvite, interactions that we can't actually support.
Sure.
We try to make our game not disappoint the player. Like, it seemed like this was possible, but it's not.
Yeah. I mean, how was that then? Sort of working on the environments and sort of building Prey from the ground up, because obviously Prey is very different to an entire city. It's a functional facility that has sort of all these mapped out areas, whereas Dunmore you kind of get the sense that it grew up like a European city with bits getting knocked down and rebuilt and all this kind of stuff. Did you have to change your approach in many ways when you started working on Prey?
Not necessarily. Not in terms of like our values, our design values, or our principles. Because we Arkane historically had already made a game like that in Arx Fatalis. And in terms of just like world building, the same principles that applied to Dishonored applied to Prey. Now mechanically they were a little bit different in the sense that, like, in Dishonored, when you leave a space, you typically leave it for good and you're never going to go back there. Whereas in Prey, the whole game is persistent and you can always go back to any space basically. But other than that, the same like care to the history of the place, the same attention to how each space connected to the other one, even thinking through how functionally the spaces contributed to what makes up the space station. All of that is the same approach that we took in Dishonored.
Sure.
If I may, there is an example of the ways. It's funny because when I joined the company, I remember there was one test map. Like, it was just a map that was, I think it was a proposal for changing one of the existing maps. Like, it's a far memory, so I don't remember exactly which one. But I remember that meeting because when, so there was like a nice drop in the beginning. So there was a little bit of verticality. You could see the area, etc., etc. And then, so people were reviewing. I was just here taking notes. I don't remember why exactly. And then someone said, "Wait a minute. How do the people who live here go to work then? If you have to drop." It sounds.
You have to do a 20-foot drop.
Exactly. So I loved it because when they said it, I was like, because now I'm starting to think about all these games that in the past or movies or whatever, where you have like a space that it's. When you think about it, if you're an architect, you're probably looking at this like that's a Lego piece, not a. So I think it was very eye-opening for me. So I think when I played it was that times the entire world, because there is no space left to the imagination. Maybe that's where they go to work. Like, you need to know where they go to have fun, where they go to make a jog, etc., etc.
Where do they sleep? Where do they eat? Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it almost feels like in the opening of Prey, which is just a stone cold banger, by the way, when kind of the curtain drops away and you realise, oh, I was in a gimbaled helicopter that was just pretending to fly me across the city. It's kind of, it makes you aware of space, I think, in no pun intended, in a very kind of real way, which I think is really cool. But so obviously, I know that you can't really talk too much about Deathloop, which is why I've kind of saved it for the end. I'm not gonna, we're not gonna, this isn't gonna start being like an intense grilling. But with the caveat that, you know, just tell me as much as you're able, in what ways does this feel like an Arkane game to you? Kind of what elements of the game are you most excited for people to see, in reference to kind of the studio's history and you know, the way you do things?
So I think that's interesting. I think one of the specificities of this game is that in its inception, when we started with this idea, it was clearly about an exploration of how much can we twist the formula, how far can we go, how crazy can we go, while keeping our, you know, it was definitely starting from the premise of how crazy, you know. So we came with a lot of crazy ideas. It was definitely a more, you know, we just made a sequel with Dishonored, and then we made a sequel to that sequel with Death of the Outsider. So, you know, we wanted to do something that, you know, maybe experiment a little bit, challenge ourselves with different things. And very quickly in those discussions and experimentations, well, one of the things that was core is actually not in the game anymore, which is fun. It's fun. It's exactly what I was saying before. Like sometimes one of the foundations of this project is like cast to the bin. Something else just, you know, grew to be stronger. So, but anyhow, I think the one thing that glued quickly was the time loop element, as you know, Groundhog Day, explore, you know. A more intimate space, maybe akin to what's in Prey, compared to the expensive cities of Dishonored, like center on you know, a cast of character that is a bit reduced, something more intimate, maybe more John Carpenter movies, like it's about this place, those people, this moment in time, not caring about what's happening elsewhere in the world, etc., etc. Very bit more focused. So that was one goal, and then your relationship with space, and we ended up with the time loop as a way to reinforce and entertain an affinity with the space that our players actually get when they replay our games many times. You know, that moment where we know the maps by heart and we are able to do all these crazy combos, like you've seen Stealth Gamer BR's videos. Like, he takes 1 month, even more sometimes, to make a video. That's how, you know, intricate it is to know the maps by heart to do those combinations. So we were like, okay, what if we find a way to, you know, make those space, make the players feel like they are at home in those spaces, not just traversing them like we did in Dishonored. So in the end, we came with this time loop, like one day, one place, one problem, one solution, a lot of a lot of different ways to go about how to find the solution to that puzzle. So anyhow, so based on that, I think the two things I'm the most excited about definitely is, well, obviously, because it's some of the two of the pillars of the game that we talked about. It's the time loop itself and what we are doing with that. I will use a term that Dan Todd, our campaign designer, might resent me for throwing myself, but you know, it's the clockwork campaign. We call the campaign the clockwork campaign. Make let your imagination wander with that. but so there's that. I think it will be interesting. And the other thing is, of course, the Juliana element, like the other player. I think it's something that is definitely new. It's something that is optional. We say it so, like you can deactivate that if you want. But I really hope people will try it, because it is one way of, you know, when thinking of multiplayer, how can we make something that respects, you know, our fiction, that makes sense in the diegetic sense, you know, so that whatever that player will do in my game can still feel like it's the story of the game. They are not betraying the character and still be allowed to play however they want. Mm-hmm. So I think that was one of the tough nuts to crack about how we ended up with this way of doing multiplayer. And I think I like it because it's intimate to the point where it's almost disturbing. It's 1 versus 1. It's not. It's something like chess, like Street Fighter. It's not. You're not one person in the. It's really kind of an intimate relationship, which is again coherent with what's happening in the fiction, and reinforces it. But also, we set up to do this mode where there is like it's a bit like Ricardo was saying. There is a bit of yes, of course, both players want to go through the other one. Yes, so there is this element of competition. Yet, actually, as for Juliana, for instance, her play style, there is nothing forcing you to do that. Should you want to just like lurk and follow the players and stalk them and jump scare them every now and then stop until the end of their mission, you can do that. If you want to harass and flee and attack and flee tactic, you can. If you want to just go full confrontation, you can. If you want to lay traps, never be seen, be the mastermind of the NPCs more or less, you can. If you want to help them, that's your choice. I mean, there is nothing in the game preventing you to, So and I think it's interesting because it works with the fiction. The fact that this nemesis is as free and as unpredictable is something that is coherent. So yeah, I'm definitely excited. It's to the point where we are now, we are now finishing the game, etc. And now what we really want is seeing what players will do with it. Like how it's fun because we will not only be seeing videos of people playing the game, which is a high note of the streaming age, I have to say, that when we release a game, we can see people finishing it the same day. But we will also be seeing those interactions, those stories being created. Hey, I'm like, for instance, if you take something like Bloodborne, I actually had a nice, actually even worse, Absolver. In Absolver, so I don't know if you know that game. It's this multiplayer brawler when you can meet with random people and you can like, team with them, or you can challenge them, etc. So I was playing Absolver, and I grouped with someone who helped me, and we were like going through the mission together. And at some point, for almost no reason, they started betraying me, which was nice because my girlfriend at the time was next to me, and she saw the whole thing, and it was like a TV show for her. What did you do? Really? Like, and she's not even caring about the game, but because I'm starting to react to the emergent betrayal, she's like, what? But look at him, he's taunting you. Like, come on, do something. It was really, really fun. So, and that story will last, longer than the game, and will be treasured because it's my story, but it's the intersection of the game and someone else. And I think it's that we are trying to foster with this, Colt and Juliana multiplayer.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for, but I want to thank you both so much. This has been really fascinating and really illuminating. So yeah, thank you again for taking the time out.
Yeah, this was a great talk. Thanks for hosting this and giving me a chance to hang out with Dinga for a little while.
Exactly, it's nice.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the permanent portal on a trolley isn't really feasible in your own homes, so there it is. But yeah,
all right, guys.
Yeah, thanks again so much, and thanks to everyone watching at home. Yeah, that'll about do it, I think. See ya.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye-bye. Thank you.